So I'm Mark Ferguson. I'm from Science Foundation Ireland, and the topic of this session is operationalising the advice. So I will begin by saying that the difference between dreams and reality is execution. And execution is really important in everything that we do. And so I want to talk a few general principles which I think are important in executing science advice. So almost any context that you're asked for advice, there is risk and uncertainty, follows on from your last statement. And here are a series of questions that I think everybody has to ask. It's not necessarily exhaustive. What do we know? How and with what confidence do we know it? What more do we need to know? How and when can we know it? What should we do and when should we do it? And how best to communicate this? Those are sort of operationally a number of questions that guide almost every situation. And uncertainty pitfalls lie around mismanagement of this, for example, omission or understatement of the uncertainties, exaggeration of the uncertainties. A very common problem is including what is countable to the exclusion of what counts. And another is a failure to address the relevance or irrelevance of the uncertainties to the decision at hand, and a failure to address the cost or timescale for reducing the uncertainties that matter. You can be very theoretical and say we need to know this, but if it costs X billion dollars and takes 10 years to do, it's not going to help what you're trying to resolve. So best practice, I would submit, includes avoiding illusionary precision, using confidence intervals, explaining their basis, discussing the unquantifiable. That's actually often quite difficult for scientists to do. It's really important to be qualitative as well as quantitative. Identifying and separating what I call pseudo-uncertainties, that's not real uncertainties. Analysing and explaining how the uncertainties matter or don't. Very often they don't matter. And be very clear about the possibilities of reducing those uncertainties with time. And something that hasn't been mentioned here is all uncertainty is two-sided. If I think of all of the people who come to see me, they always portray uncertainty as one-sided. They say, if you do this, something terrible is going to happen. And I say, yes, that is perfectly possible, but it is equally possible that something very good is going to happen because all uncertainty is two-sided. It is possible that our current models about climate change may be too strong and that climate change may be less disruptive and adverse to human well-being than the current consensus, but equally, it could be more disruptive and it could be more severe. So all uncertainty is two-sided. And then the last thing I wanted to say something about was the burden of proof. So all science is contingent. And essentially, the greater the consistency and coherence, we haven't said much about coherence in this meeting, the coherence of the evidence and analysis, the lower the likelihood that the principal conclusions from it will be overturned. So you need volume of evidence, you need consistency of evidence, but you also need coherence of evidence. There will always be a single contradictory piece. And I think we all need to address that up front with people. That's how science works. People challenge things. You will always find a scientist who will take the opposite opinion. You will always find a paper published either in a reputable journal or the British Journal of Fiddling About, which essentially tells you something that is different from what you're looking for. So you need to look at that, and you need to address it with the public and say it's not yet scrutinized and repeated. It is actually how science works. It's usually a mistake. There are very few scientific revolutions. Yes, there are scientific revolutions, but they're rare. Most times, it's a mistake or it's someone with a different agenda. So those are some principles that I think apply across almost every era. I will close by saying one further thing, and that is that we've heard a lot about the changes in science over the last few years. There's one change that hasn't been spoken about, and that is that we are historically at a very unique time in the history of science. And that is historically the pace or the ability to be able to apply science was rate limited only by the pace of discovery. So if you go back 100 years or 200 years, our ability to apply science was completely limited by our ability in terms or the pace of discovery. That is no longer true. Our ability, of course, requires new discovery, but the development or the implementation of known knowledge or science is now as much a rate-limiting step in the application of science as is the discovery of new knowledge. And that is a unique position in the history of science, and actually requires to be embraced and talked about by people, because it is as important to apply what we know as it is to discover new things. I will be very happy to talk about our agenda on impact, or indeed how science advice works in Ireland, but it's not the topic of this symposium, and I'm on time. Thank you very much.